Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world, and a huge, huge welcome to Produce, Mix, Fix and Conquer. So we're in our new quarters. We're now based in Manchester in the Northern Quarter. So super excited to be here. And we've got a fantastic guest coming up for you very, very shortly. So if you're on YouTube, feel free to join us on Facebook, which is facebook.com/groups/produce, mix, fix and conquer, or facebook.com/produce, mix, fix and conquer, which is our public page. Or feel free to, if you're on Facebook, to go over to YouTube, which is youtube.com/produce, mix, fix and conquer. So we've got a fantastic guest, which is an amazing producer and composer, Emilio D. Miller. Now, Emilio has won Latin Grammy. He's also been Grammy nominated as well for his fantastic work. So without further ado, Emilio, how are you doing today, sir?
Hello.
Hello. How's things over your end?
Thank you for having me. Is audio on? Is everything working?
I think we're all good to go.
Back?
I think they can.
Wonderful. Good to see you, Rich, and thank you for having me. And hello to your wonderful audience.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for joining us today. So we're super excited. So tell us, whereabouts are you based, Emilio?
I'm in Buenos Aires, Argentina. Although pre-pandemic, I was sort of around. Which was nice. I'm still around, only the room looks the same and everyone is on a screen now.
Wow. I know it's been such a change there, hasn't it? The world has just changed massively.
But I will say, even before recent events, about 70% of my work was already remote pre and post production, and I would travel for sessions. So that part has changed slightly. But at least work-wise, a lot has remained the same for me. And I was working with a broad-based artist, and I still am.
Wow. It's incredible now, though, isn't it, with technology, what you can do. And I guess that you do a lot of remote work then with your clients then? So in real time, is that how you do it?
Not this, I mean, I work with a broad-based artist exclusively. I didn't really plan it that way. It sort of developed to a point where it's the only thing that's been happening for a few years now. Not complaining though.
Amazing.
And of course I love traveling. And to have the chance to travel to do what you love and meet new and exciting people to make music is wonderful.
Fantastic.
Of course, like the rest of us, I look forward to going back to that.
Absolutely. You, me both. It's just, I think, though, to be fair as well, it's incredible the fact that we can all start to maybe travel again, but also as well live music. And I don't know about you, but I absolutely love live music and watching bands play. So how are things over in Argentina? Have you got the chance to be able to do that? How are things over there? Have you got the option to see people live?
I would. I'm erring on the side of caution, but yes, there are some live shows following the proper protocols. So the scene is coming back very gradually.
Fantastic, amazing. Right, Emilio, thanks so much for that. So what we'll do, like we have with the rest of the guests over the last few months, is maybe have a chat about your journey to start off with, if that's good with you. So like we've done with our previous guests, so what music were you listening to as a kid, and what type of music did your parents get you into in your household?
Well, it was a very enriching musical experience. My childhood home. My parents had listened to essentially all styles of music. I'm not sure that they had been so much into what it's usually called Latin music from the North American perspective, but let's say music from parts of Latin America and the Caribbean. but we, as a dictatorship took over in Argentina, we went to live in Venezuela, uh,
Wow.
which received us with open arms and a lot of new musical and cultural experiences. So I was raised there for about 6 years, and then we came back. So that added a whole, literally, a whole other flavor to the household, which now, in addition to rock, classical, and other styles of music, would have a lot of salsa, for instance, and folklore from the Americas.
Incredible, absolutely amazing. So you listen to that type of music. So
And
so how?
I should probably add,
Mm,
and my parents were book publishers. My mother's, in fact, still at it, and one of and through their work, they became acquainted with a lot of Brazilian musicians who would come to play in Buenos Aires. Some of which were also writers that they got to publish. So, for instance, they had become friends with Vinicius de Moraes, which some know by name, others know just from his work as the lyricist from a lot of songs that Tom Jobim wrote.
wow,
So
amazing.
that was the kind of crowd that they would hang out with in Buenos Aires during that time. So I got an early exposure to that music. I should I could probably say from the source. And it kind of comes full circle with my work being nominated for a Grammy last year in Best Latin Jazz Album with a Brazilian music album with music by American composer John Fimbry and lyrics and unforgettable vocal performances by Thalma de Freitas.
Absolutely amazing. So it's so great that you're still influenced by that music that you listened to so many years ago. So I suppose going back as well though to maybe like your childhood, early teens, were there any particular musical instruments that you picked up first when you were listening to that
Yeah,
music?
like a lot of other friends who wanted to play very loud instruments and ended up playing the piano that was at the family homes.
Yeah.
I was very fortunate in that my parents supported my early uh, interest in playing the drums. So my story is that of a teenage child. Initially, I started when I was 8.
Mm.
Um, and a lot of living in an apartment building and having all the neighbors complaining about things. So that's the origin story.
Absolutely amazing. So tell us what was the next stage. So I understand. Tell us about your educational route as well. So I understand that you studied music as well. So where did you study music?
That's right. Actually, if I can, let me tell you a middle stage that I think it's relevant, but because at least now, in hindsight, I see how it all led to where I am today,
Yeah,
which is I started playing in bands, uh, having that early experience with books and writers. Writing always came somewhat easy to me. And I wanted to get more involved with the music making process, but I was, at least at the time, the cliche of the drummer who doesn't know any harmony or composition, even though instinctively I understood a lot of it and I understood what my role was in supporting what was going on with the rest of the band. But the way that I found to get involved early on in the creative process was writing lyrics. So
yeah,
in a way, I now see that I was always interested in getting a broader look at what we were creating and thinking outside of my instrument and trying to get involved in what was happening and the message that was and the story that was being told.
Mm.
Um, when you were asking about my education, I went to college in Boston, Berklee College of Music.
Yeah.
Um, Before going there, I took some lessons in harmony and ear training. Parts of that were giving names to things that I already instinctively knew or was aware of, and a lot of other things I learned there, and of course in school. Um, and the one of the great things of my Berkeley experience was that it was the first time that I went into a recording studio, and I discovered I didn't realize it right away, but something about the process of recording music was very exciting for me, and I didn't realize it at first. I thought, well, okay, I'm doing this thing that I read that my idols do, so maybe I'm a step closer to where I thought I wanted to be. But later I realized it was something else. It was about that experience of making of how the recording experience affected the mindset, my mindset, and that of the people around me, in terms of what we wanted to bring to the performance.
Yeah.
And that's still something that I'm really focused on today. How do we make this special? How do we make this something worth preserving in the first place?
It's a really tricky question, though. I mean, it's like it's something that I think many composers chase. And I think I might have told you before, but I am obviously a mastering engineer, but also as well over the years I've done for fun. I mean, mastering engineer is my job, but for fun, as I've composed music as well, and I've played guitar for 20 plus years. But I'm always trying to chase that song, that perfect song that relates to as many people as possible. But still, I mean, how do you keep things fresh when you're songwriting, Amelia? How do you keep things fresh when you're bringing together compositions, and what inspires your compositions when you're writing new material?
Well, and the advice that a lot of writers um, will get from older guys is you have to start writing about what you know. I think that sometimes in chasing a feeling that's universal, we lose track of what matters to us. And
Yeah.
how do we bring an emotional performance to something, either a story or emotion that's so vague that you're no longer connected to it? So I think a lot of it has to do with vulnerability, like really being willing to connect with that part of you that you may think it's embarrassing to share with other people, but it's actually what people see, whether you like it or not,
Yeah.
and to write from that space, from that very intimate space in which things feel close, feel intense, and are sometimes a little bit scary because you don't know if you want to show so much. That's really you. That's what makes your music potentially unique, and that's what will bring the best performance that you can give. That kind of connection, that being in the edge of fear, of failure, if you will. And sometimes you will. And the great thing is there's always another take in the studio.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
but knowing that you can get in that emotional zone to write and then to perform what you wrote, it's vital. And I often think that the experiences that I feel are more successful in my work as a producer is when artists let me into that space and we can have a conversation about
Yeah.
what is really happening.
Absolutely.
By the way, I also think that's one of the key aspects of pre-production. Uh, I often hear that you produce in the studio, and sure, a big part of what you do happens there. But the ability to have a repertoire of emotional triggers that will make the artist deliver something special, that's something you need to work on before.
Completely agree. It's such a tricky thing to do though, and then I'm guessing sometimes I've heard some producers where they've said that they've come up with an idea, but yet they make the artist think that they've come up with the idea as well, because sometimes, I don't know if you've kind of come across that a few times, kind of bit, so it can be quite hard to sometimes relate to the artist. But have you ever come across that where you've come up with an idea, but you've almost help the artist believe that they've come up with the idea just to get them to the next stage of the song?
Uh, Sometimes you resort to that. I think what makes this work tricky is the illusion or the desire, I suppose, that you should be able to work with anyone because you have the tools.
Yeah.
And no, you probably the tools alone, whether technical or musical or emotional, will not enable you to connect with just anyone. I mean, they have to be open to it too.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and sometimes people, and I'm talking about artists with their people first,
Yeah.
they're not
Absolutely.
they're not ready to open up like that. And sometimes the timing isn't right in their lives to get into a process that requires that kind of openness and vulnerability and intimacy. Maybe they have some things that they need to work out first. Maybe they never will. And what good are your tools when you're working with someone who isn't ready? Uh, I mean, you can provide them with ideas and then tell them they're great for having come up with that.
Yeah.
They'll know. I mean, you feel the difference. How to think that they won't be able to tell? I think that doesn't speak highly of one's connection to the artist, and something that I feel needs to be present every time in every with every person that you choose to work with
Hmm.
is mutual admiration. You need to admire the
Absolutely.
artists you work with, and at some point, if you are the one who's bringing everything that's missing, they'll feel that you're not giving them the space that they need to bring something of their own, and that can hurt the process.
That's absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Emilio. And you're so right as well. And but as you said, it's you rightly said, it's the person first. So it's how to connect with that person to bring out, the artist and what they can achieve as well. But
Granted, we're getting to a touchy subject here, which is, so what if you can't? Do you
true.
tell them that they're not ready and move on to the next thing? Do you try to work that out with them? I mean, maybe the recording process will help them with whatever it is that they need to get out. But I mean, and it's been said before, there's a huge psychological aspect to the work that we do. But unless you're trained for that, and even if you are, no, people are not going to a music producer or mixer or anyone in our field to work out their problems. I mean, if they acknowledge that they have something that they need to work out, they'll go to a different professional. So even if that came out, one should acknowledge that that we're not supposed to be able to help them work that out. We can bring somebody else in if everyone's open to that. Um, but what I see is that most of the time, people will try to make it work with the person that's in front of them with whatever they're ready to give. I
Yeah.
don't always feel that the results are equally good or equally moving, because there's something that's not moving at the core of it. Um, but sometimes, I mean, what you're hired to do is to make it work,
Yeah.
and not everything works by the same standards. And anyone who's worked on this enough knows that sometimes you dress it up to make up for something that wasn't there. It's not the same, but it could very well be successful. It could
Mm,
very well reach an audience that picks up on what makes that song or album special, and maybe that's not at the core of the song or the performance, but maybe that's in something that you added, but there's something there that's real.
absolutely. That's amazing. Thank you so much for that, Emilio. I once got told, actually, I've been told a few times by people that a great producer, let's say that the band, they're a four-piece band, but the producer is the fifth band member. So it's the band member that interjects ideas and takes the songs to a whole new level as well, and throws in different parts or different structures and pulls things apart. So how often do you, well, when you're in the studio, so how often do you, kind of come across issues where band members aren't quite all gelling together? As a producer, maybe it's quite tough, but as a producer, how do you gel all those people together as the extra member to achieve the end result?
Well, i'd I'd start by saying that you're not always, I mean, that idea that you're that extra member, the is not always something that they're prepared to do. I mean, how long are you going to work on that relationship so that you're so that they're comfortable with you? Um, that's something I've discussed in lectures and classes with aspiring producers, which is one of your first challenges as a producer is whether you can produce yourself, not your own music necessarily. That could be it, um,
Yeah.
but whether you can produce your own career out of nothing. So how do you get your first gig? Um, I don't know how experienced our audience is or will be, because I understand this will remain online. But how do you get that first gig? How do you convince someone to let you help them, just to phrase it very generically, with their music, when you have nothing to show for yourself? I mean, you may have something that you've created yourself, but that doesn't show that you have come into somebody else's creative process and managed to bring something useful to it.
Yeah.
Um, so that's the first challenge. And what I usually advise young aspiring producers to do, of course, this is a little more difficult in the times we live in, but it's still possible, is ask to sit in at rehearsals and listen and take notes and
Amazing.
say nothing until they ask you what you're writing. and
Absolutely
then
brilliant.
and then what you're saying is the answer to a question. That's usually a safe place from which to develop a relationship with an artist. Make sure they ask you first.
Absolutely. That's an absolutely fantastic answer. Thanks so much for that, Emilio. Expanding a bit, so you mentioned when you went to Berkeley, so it's the first time going into a recording studio, if that's right. So,
That's right. And something else that I got to experience for the first time at Berkeley was recording sessions for film scoring majors.
wow.
And that was also very exciting. That to be on the other side of the creation of that emotional backbone to a story that was being shown on screen, and that in fact was an early stimulus to what became my next career path as a composer for visual media.
Wow.
It all sort of ties in because that's also storytelling, which was very important to me from the very beginning.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much for that. So tell us more about some of the compositions that you've written for media. So I know that you've had work appear on Fox and also on National Geographic as well. So tell us more about some of the pieces that you've done over the years that have appeared on media on our screens.
Well, my work for television specifically was mostly in what's called music branding. So you got all the sonic logos or sonic IDs for the different segments or the channel itself. I wrote about 90 to 100 different very short pieces for the launch of the FX channel, which was a branch of the Fox network in Latin America, and just seeing how the producers work in creating an identity for that channel, or for a channel or for a program, and working with art directors was such a vital part of my training in understanding how much of what the thing that we're working on is in the way that you present it.
Yeah,
um and it's not just the musical elements, but how those are conditioned by the visuals and vice versa. um it's all multimedia, and it's I think it's rather naive to think that these days we're working on just a musical product. We're working on the musical side of a brand that has visuals, that has a certain aesthetic, that may have a certain palette, that may have a certain luminosity to it.
yeah,
And um, and something else that I think it's important to stress is, m- increasingly often, uh, all of us, regardless of the experience that some of our colleagues may have had with major labels, m- all of us are working increasingly often with independent artists, and something that they won't always have is a team that is defined, that is doing the A&R work that sometimes a label would have done for an artist. So one of the decisions we have to make as producers is whether we're going to advise that they seek somebody else. Sometimes there is a manager who will have an idea of how to brand the artist that they're working with, and I like when that's the case, because they will tell me what they need the musical product to be. I mean,
yeah,
I will still have some creative freedom. I will still bring my ideas to the table, but it's useful when they know what they're shooting for. When they have a target audience in mind, that's great. When the territory is no longer such an important thing, maybe for some folkloric groups, that they will have a local audience that they want to target first. But for, let's call it, more global styles, not what's called global music, which we formerly called world music, but
yeah,
for styles that are listened to all over the world, whether we consider them to be mainstream or not, um, it's useful that they know what the boundaries of their musical product is, and if they don't, somebody needs to set them for them, at least for one album or single that you're working on. Okay, what's going to be the palette here? I mean, if there's a band, they have instruments that they play. Do they have any other instruments that they play? How do they feel about bringing additional instruments? Is that something that we're open to? What colors are we working with? uh the people that you want to reach with this music, what do you think they're listening to now, and why? How can we bring some of that into what we're doing? um so when you're working with independent artists, there's that other side that may not have been an integral part of what a music producer might have done as part of a bigger team, but the needs of a project, of a product, are exactly the same in an independent context. There's just less people to do it, so you sort of have to decide whether you're going to take that on or just point out that that's necessary.
That's such a phenomenal answer. Thank you so much, Amelia. That's amazing insight. So I suppose one of my questions would be then, so you're working with a client for an advert and you need to come up with a piece. So how do you, when you're talking about like palettes and colors and emotion and that side of things, so how do you put yourself, I suppose it's quite a hard question, but how do you put your composition to the screen so it fits? Do you try out many, many different ideas? Do you throw lots of ideas at your client when you're writing compositions for media? Is it the first, first composition that usually makes it? How many times do you have to make new compositions to get the thumbs up and the all clear, good to go?
Yes. To all of the above. Yeah. Either or. Something that was never particularly challenging for me, and is when in visual media, when there's a good editor, they will usually edit to music, to temp music. Sometimes they'll tell you what it is. Sometimes they'll tell you to imitate it in a way or to bring some elements of it. And sometimes they won't tell you, but it's still edited to music or to what we may call a sense of tempo or a timing. They may be looking at minutes and seconds, or they may be feeling, and again, the sense of the scenes or the clip's own timing, hence the reference to tempo. And I always found it somewhat easy to pick up on that. And the few times where I couldn't, I did my best to write music that would fit what I felt the scene needed, but more often than not, the scene ended up being re-edited because the music pointed out some inconsistencies in the editing. Not every time, but it's happened. Um, and something else that I would do when scoring films in particular, is they already have something that they're telling with dialogue, with the way that they frame a certain scene, with the again with the kind of cuts and transitions that they're using. They're already doing that. I'm You wouldn't want to hear two people telling you the same story at the same time. So what can I bring to this that tells you a backstory? So I mean, sometimes directors will ask you specifically, like, I want the audience to know that this guy has bad intentions, even though he's not showing them. And maybe the music will have to do that to condition the audience to perceive uh, hidden intentions. Um, or or maybe someone is in love but is trying to hide it on screen. They're hiding it really well, but how do you hint to what they're feeling? Maybe the music needs to do that. And one of the most challenging gigs I've had in writing for visual media was a documentary for which I got nominated to a Hollywood Music and Media Award, a feature documentary which was called Hope Was Here, about the experience of volunteerism, which is usually college students who will go to a place that it's in need of help and volunteer to do that kind of work. And it's a very controversial subject because often these kids are there. In the case of the documentary, it was Peru, and they're there for 2 weeks. And to what extent do they really get involved in what they're doing? To what extent is it just another thing to publish on social media that you're doing something unique? Is it relevant? Is it really useful? So these are the questions that the documentary raised.
Yeah.
And the director, Mark Denega, hi, Mike, um, told me, I don't want the music to condition the audience into perceiving that anything of what we're saying is inherently good or bad.
Wow.
So, like, I've been told that music needs to condition the audience in all sorts of different ways. And some are more challenging than others, but you have your go-to colors for certain things. And sometimes they're influenced by other film music in which certain colors hint to the same emotions. But how do you bring music to the table that does not make you feel particularly positive or negative about what you're watching? And the answer, my friends, is in the documentary, which you can watch online on demand.
Wow, we'll have to check that out. That's never thought, I never thought of music like that. Because, like you said, Emilio, I've always, as a engineer and as a film watcher and TV program watcher, I've always envisaged that music, like we watch something like Game of Thrones, so someone is about to stab someone, so that music, it's very kind of like, you're on, the edge of your seat, and it's very kind of, I don't know, it makes the music kind of makes you feel really tense. Yeah. And then other music, I don't know, there's a love scene and it's kind of like, fairly happy music. But to actually have music that doesn't make you feel either emotion, that's crazy. And I've got to check out that documentary, man. That's absolutely incredible.
Just picture the writing process. I would like maybe try something on the keyboard. Oh no, wait, I'm feeling something. That's wrong.
That's crazy. Must have been such a challenge though as well, to go through a process like
in
that.
The end,
That's
you
crazy.
as with anything musical, you develop a language that you realize gets the point across. Is the emotion or lack thereof inherent to that language? Maybe not. Maybe it's a combination of that and harmonic rhythm, or lack of a certain pulse of subdivision that you can easily measure. Maybe it's in the sounds that you use. Maybe it's in the lack of strong attacks. Maybe it's all of the above. Maybe in that you develop a language in which you have these knobs, these elements can have more or less of, that are still in that state of numbness where you don't really know what to feel, but you have layers of that.
Yeah. That's absolutely. I think you've just blown my mind, and our watchers who are watching this now and after the interview as well, Emilio. That's absolutely incredible. So cool. So tell us then, so just to explore a bit more. Sorry.
Imagine that
Go ahead.
This is already something that I had, I guess, from childhood, from the experience of being around, writers and storytellers.
Yeah.
My whole life essentially. So in many ways, I then got to become one as a composer for visual media, as a lyricist initially, then as a composer for visual media, and then whenever I get the chance, I try to bring this toolkit to the music that I produce.
Absolutely amazing. So do you already have, obviously you've got, I'm guessing, a repertoire of ways that you can write compositions. So do you have many go-to formulas, or is it always a new formula for a new project? Is that how you work, or do you think, right, okay, I've got a good
Well, I would
foundation and
circle
basis?
I would circle back to the issue of language. Uh, who is this for? What language do these people speak? And I'm not talking about the language in which the lyrics are written
Yeah,
necessarily. I mean that could be a part of it.
sure.
Um, I'm saying how many how many chords can you throw in a reggae tune before it becomes a sort of fusion, for instance?
Yeah.
Um, are you expecting tunes to modulate? Does that feel that part of the vocabulary that the audience will expect or react positively to? I mean, it's not all functional. It's not all to please an audience. Sometimes it's to tease them. But there's always a language that that you have in common with those people. You can stretch it a little bit, but to try to reach them with a language that's completely outside of what they can understand or have some experience with is, you know, it's like inventing a product without doing proper research first and then just trying to sell it. A lot of music is produced that way. I'm doing whatever I want, and then why won't people buy it? Well, maybe because you didn't pay attention to what they wanted to buy or listen to first. I mean, it's not
Yeah,
all a transaction, but let's bring it back to the emotional aspect of what we're doing, which is we're trying to connect with people. um, i I could read to you the most moving poetry in Spanish, and it would not move you one bit. You might perceive that I'm feeling something from it, but that is not, as far as I know, a language that we have in common. Um, so what's the use? Of course, when you bring it to actual language, I think that for anyone out, any non-native English speaker grew up listening to a certain amount of music in English, to which we sung whatever lyrics we could make out, sometimes with made up words, and that moved us in some way. But then again, it's not the language in the lyrics, it's the language in the music.
absolutely. And it's just like listened to. That's so amazing. Thank you, Emilio. So it's like I've listened to many pieces that are primarily just adverts, but I've had an advert before where I've just had it on loop because that 1 minute of music to me was just so, even though it was for an advert, that 1 minute of music was so good. I was just wanting more of that. So to be able to actually come up with something like that that's so amazing. I mean, I didn't actually buy the product, but yet that music still captured me. And actually, as a composer, I decided to actually write a track, I think a couple of weeks later, with a similar guitar riff. And that advert, actually, rather than a band, that advert actually inspired me to write a piece of music. So it's crazy how, like, when you're writing music for media, how it can actually inspire people in different ways. But how do you keep, thanks, man, how do you keep that inspiration flowing? Is it books that, like you said, it's you're also like a storyteller, but do you carry on at the minute? Do you read books as well to inspire you? Do you watch
Books,
videos
film,
online? And yeah,
series, and it's, to me, it's stories and emotions. um that, I mean, part of it is, it's just getting out of the studio and experiencing life and what
yeah,
it's got to offer, and and broadening your own emotional palette. Then you're going to find a way to bring that to the music that you make. But
yeah,
you need to to have more layers to what you can feel. Not
Yeah,
just the stories that you want to tell, but the angles from which you want to tell them.
absolutely. That's absolutely incredible. Thank you so much
Perspective,
for
by the way.
that. Yeah,
It, for me at least, parenting has been a side of that experience. But for those who are listening who are not parents or do not want that in their life, it could just be anyone else in your life that tells you how they see you and your story. um Kids will tell you they don't care how you feel
yeah,
about about what they're showing you about yourself. Adults, it's useful to have an adult in your life who doesn't care either and who
yeah,
will give it to you straight. um Not everybody wants that, but again, if we're talking how do you keep inspired, well, you got to have some truth in there and some perspective, and that's not going to come exclusively from you.
Mhm.
I mean, so you need to have angles from which to look at different things. um the news is an example. Read the same news in different media. um Watch how they talk about that same thing in a talk show that's also supposed to bring a humorous side to something that you may not see the humor to. Let's see what they do with it. And then you can bring that into your toolkit. How to look at the thing. Sometimes, I mean, one of the phrases that I've used before is there's no bad ideas, only bad days in which we eh, don't know what to do with the ideas that we have. And sometimes you just need to write the idea down. Like, okay, a song about this, and maybe you can't think of it as the time at the time, but the thing that can be blocking you creatively is that you're trying to tell it from your perspective, and maybe you need to tell it from the perspective of someone who just saw your facial expression on the street and realized what you were feeling. Maybe that's the way in which that story pays off.
that's incredible. That's just, it's just amazing to actually go so deep into this. I don't think we have explored it a little bit, but the journey of songwriting and the journey of actually going down that road, and yeah, that's really interesting saying that about how exploring songwriting by thinking about other people's perceptions rather than your own, and maybe creating characters as well. And that in itself, it must be fun, right? Coming up with like new characters and story. Do you do like storyboards as well sometimes when you come up with compositions to go with those stories? Or
Perhaps mentally, I've never actually had them made. Although there, I have this block of post-its here that I will use sometimes during Zoom sessions to draw things that will either inspire people or make them laugh or snap out of
amazing.
whatever thing they need to snap out of, and just keep it fun. One of the challenges for newer generations, I think, it's to understand that yes, we can do things remotely, but it's important to understand that what you see through this window, it's only a part of what's happening. And if you don't understand that there's something you're missing and you need to um, intentionally find out what that is, ask about it, try to get as broad a perspective of what's happening on the other side as you can,
Mm,
then you're missing out if you're only dealing with the bidimensional window into the other person's studio or booth or whatever it is.
that's
I
amazing.
In the studio I don't use the talk box. often, because a lot of what I want to address in performance has to do with being close to the other person and see their body language in addition to what they have to say about how they feel. And
Yeah.
sometimes you pick up things on there, like for example, you wouldn't know if I've been tapping my foot the whole time, but if you knew that, you might understand something about how I feel. I'm not, but you, but if you knew, you would pick up something else about how I'm feeling right now, and you would be able to address it. Maybe not pointing at my foot specifically, but asking, "Hey, how how was your day?"
Yeah. Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
knowing when to take a break.
Yeah. And I think that's it. I think you're so right. And I can't remember which documentary I was watching. I think it was rock band Switchfoot. And I think it was John Foreman, the lead singer, that said that, he's a prolific songwriter. And I've talked to, I think it's Tim Palmer. So Tim Palmer's worked with Switchfoot as well. But John Foreman's thing was like when he was writing songs that he said, paraphrasing here, I think, but he said that, sometimes a song comes to you just like that, and then you're all good to go. And sometimes you might be trying to push a song out, but that song's not quite ready to go. And, there's no point spending hours and hours and hours chasing that song if it's not ready yet. So I suppose my question to you is, how do you know when a song you've spent too much time on it, and as you said, when is it time to take a break? From your experience, when do you find that is a good time to stop and go, right, okay, I'll go back to that idea either tomorrow or later today? And how do you approach that situation as a producer?
That that applies to the pacing of the session in general. Are you going to be in the studio for the entire day? How many songs do you think you can track in however many hours you're spending in there? When do you break for lunch? And then, as the day progresses, how important is it to stick to your session plan if something else is happening? Um, Sometimes the way in which you choose to record, or the order in which you choose to record different instruments or layers, will condition how the next person feels about or has to feed off of in their performance. um Sometimes with it's more noticeable with vocalists, but it's not exclusive to them. uh how sometimes you need to mute certain instruments so that they have more freedom to move around rhythmically, and they're not conditioned to stick to whatever grid subdivision or groove is being suggested by the backing track. um and you might say, well, aren't they supposed to, if that's the track? It depends on what you're working on. If you really want a moving vocal performance, sometimes you need to mute stuff, and then if they don't work and you unmute them, then you need to redo that other thing. But the vocal is what's going to reach people more often than not.
Absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Emilio. Tell us as well. So we've not really touched on the subject so far during this chat, but tell us what DAW are you using when you're doing your compositions? What plugins do you enjoy using? What software and what instruments do you particularly enjoy using as well when coming up with your amazing compositions?
um the to sum it up, whatever is in front of me is much better than everything that is not in front of me.
Okay.
So whatever tools I have at my disposal, I will use to reach whatever sound I have in mind. Sometimes you rent things that you don't have. I of course, this is my home studio, and it's intentionally very limited because I like to collaborate with people. I like being in other spaces. Of course, uh, since COVID, I purchased some more tools because I couldn't go to the other studios or places. I mean, I could still outsource some things, but I want to be there when it happens. So the only way to make that happen was to acquire more tools for myself. But generally speaking, you're asking about the AWs, and I can be a little more specific.
Sure.
For anything that's composition and that it requires a lot of MIDI information, it's a digital performer, which
Okay.
it's not very popular these days, but
Mm.
it's something I got used to when I was working in visual media, and it sort of stuck, and it's pretty versatile, much in the way that I hear Logic is working for some colleagues.
Yeah.
But it's whatever I do in there is usually exported to Pro Tools, either to send off to mix for or to for some final tweaks. I rarely, if ever, send tracks directly out of Performer. There's also the fact that I want to send sessions with if I'm more so if I'm working remotely, I want to send sessions with markers, bar numbers, and you may think that you have a grid for that. If you record to click, that grid is worth something. If not, you need markers, you need more. So I want to send the session file if at all possible, or at least a MIDI file with the markers that they can import into whatever the AW they're using, um, so that when we go back and forth, all we need to understand is the aesthetics, but we don't have misunderstandings about where things are or what sections are called. And of course, if there is a such a misunderstanding, something that's been vital to me, it's okay. Let's just call it what you call it, and I'll write it down until I remember it. And let's address this in whichever language is comfortable to you. I'm not going to let my uh, opinion or nomenclature of a certain piece of music get in the way of what we need to do.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for that, Emilio. So tell us, is there any plugins that you enjoy using at the moment as well when you're working in your DAW, or do you tend to stick to everything as it is inside the DAW?
I I don't have go-to plugins really. I don't, and part of it is a large part of my work has been with what we may call organic music. So it's very much about being truthful to the sounds that we capture, and and more time goes into the microphone choices and the microphone placement choices,
Yeah.
because that's sort of the core of the sound that we're going to stick to. However, in some more recent productions, one of which is going to be released next Friday, August 13, by a Vietnamese artist called Tri Nguyen. He plays an instrument called Dan Chang, which is a Vietnamese sitar. And
Wow.
I don't want to give away what the track sounds like, but it involved more processing than anything else I'd done before.
All right.
Um, Tons of programming too. It was interesting because we had been friends for a little while, and at some point when you're friends with someone who's in music, you you kind of feel like the natural next step is to work together, which is not always right, but this time it worked. Um, and so we started talking about what we might want to do together, and I tend to try to work from a concept, particularly if it's for albums. In this case, we were at least at first tackling a single, and I asked what repertoire he had or he wanted to work on, and um, and he said, "I want to do something that I've never done before." Okay, what is it? I don't know. It just has to do something that I've never done before. And in the case of Tree, this is very challenging because he's done quite a bit of experimentation. Both of his instrument is considered traditional slash classical in Vietnamese music. So he's done classical in the sense of the local perception of classical, but he's also blended his instrument in with what's classical to the rest of us, aka string quartet or chamber ensemble. And he had also done an entire album in which he mixed his traditional instrument from Vietnam with traditional instruments from other countries. So he had done already all sorts of different fusions. So
Amazing.
there weren't a lot of things that he hadn't done, but we found a few and we picked one. And if you want to know what we ended up with, tune into your favorite streaming platform next August 13 and look up Troncom by Tri Nguyen. We can probably write this down in the comments somewhere in case
Yeah.
somebody wonders how to spell that. By the way, speaking of upcoming releases, there's a single I produced that was uploaded to YouTube a few days ago, but was officially released today. It's called
Really?
"Ring the Bells." That's or a new single that's a homage to Chick Corea, written by composer John Fimbry and with lyrics. Part of the music and vocal performance by Thelma de Freitas. So essentially, the same team that worked on Sorti, the album that was nominated for a Grammy last year. That's on streaming platforms today and this Friday, because it's August is the month of releases apparently for me. This Friday, August 6th, Mythologies, my first ever production in classical music. I've produced classical music for my own music for visual media, and I've done string arrangements for productions that I've done. But this is my first venture in the realm of classical music, and one of the questions that I felt we needed to ask ourselves was, okay, classical, it's got a certain boundaries in terms of the various compositional language that can entail. But audio wise, do we want to stick to the postcard of the performance, which is okay, we had these instruments, this is where they were sitting relative to each other, and this is how they really sound? Or do we want to find a universe that may or may not exist in which these performances happened? And does it stay the same throughout each of the pieces, or does it evolve much like the composition evolves? You probably already know the answer to that because I wouldn't be talking about the options if we hadn't gone in one of those directions. But you can listen to that starting this Friday. And there's a
Amazing.
preview that you can access on daneblast.com. Dane Blast is the composer and pianist in most of the pieces and Mythologies.
Absolutely
And
amazing. Brilliant.
the space of advertising and
It's great.
shameless self promotion. I can't even
Absolutely
promote the artist
amazing.
I'm working with, so I'm not sure it counts as self promotion entirely.
No, I'll tell you what, though, Emilio, as you said there, August, my friend, has been a very, very busy month for you then. That's absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. And anyone that wants to find out more as well, do feel free. I'm sure Emilio will be happy for you to do so. Contact him directly, so he'll be able to point you
Absolutely, and I'm super
in the
easy to
directions.
find. You can see my name on the screen right here,
Yep.
and add an at before that, and you can find me anywhere.
Fantastic, amazing. Thank you so much for that. Before you go, Emilio, so we've got a couple of messages that have come through from our audience today. So
Okay.
this is from our Facebook community. And they said, so how do you work with all these great musicians on your productions? Do you write a full arrangement where they follow your intro, bridge, or any other general idea? Or do you write a basic cue chart and let the musician follow their instincts and then told them what to do based on the music they're playing?
It's gone both ways. I'm sometimes very specific with what the arrangement needs to be, as in writing out every note, and sometimes it's what we call a lead sheet or a chord chart. Um, I usually do go over how we're going to handle transitions. Um, Sometimes I won't. Sometimes I'll just see. I'll just have it, particularly when we're talking about session players. So there usually isn't a rehearsal prior to the session, but there is one within the session. They run the chart. They get a feel for it,
Yeah.
and sometimes I won't talk it over beforehand and see how they instinctively react to what the music tells them should be happening, or how a certain transition needs to be handled. And sometimes they will, I mean, why would I want to get in the way of something brilliant that I wouldn't have thought of? So sometimes you just need to take a step back, see what happens, uh be try have make sure. In my case, I'm though I sometimes engineer, I don't consider myself an audio engineer. There's people who are far more passionate and, of course, better at that than I am. So I usually like to rely on somebody else to to handle the engineering duties at the session, particularly so that I can pay attention to everything else that is happening.
Yeah.
And sometimes you'll hear three or four musicians handle a transition spontaneously in their own individual way. So what's happening collectively doesn't work. But if you pay enough attention and you make sure the engineer is recording everything that's happening, because sometimes you won't catch everything right away, but it's useful to be able to play that back and see, okay, what was that? And by the way, something else that uh, a lot of colleagues are familiar with. Sometimes you might go to a certain musician and tell them, that thing that you did in the second verse was perfect. Do that every time. And they'll go, what did I do?
It's true.
Um, so unless you have uh, a great memory and are able to describe what they did in terms that are that are mutually understood, because sometimes you might describe, okay, so you did this line in this register and you were like really pushing it on this tension, and sometimes the answer to that will be, oh, sorry, what?
Yeah.
So maybe your description with words or with certain theoretical terms won't cut it. Maybe your emotional description won't cut it. That's not what they were feeling. It worked for you. So what was it factually? That's what you need to make sure everything is recorded, because when all else fails, let's listen to it and you can point to what's happening. You'll see a lot of pictures from me at sessions pointing at a random point, and that's
You did
usually
point
me
this one
going.
out to me. Again, you pointed it to me, but yeah, you did point this one out. Yeah,
I
completely.
I when there's pictures from sessions, I'm very often captured doing.
Yeah.
And that's usually when I'm saying that thing. That's what I'm talking about.
That's what we need.
Uh, and by the way, some of our colleagues might be asking, can't you just say a bar number or right after the second chorus? What if we don't call it the same? Again, you can't let that difference in nomenclature and in knowledge of theory or emotional perception of what's happening keep you from getting to the best version that you can get to on a given day. So sometimes the only way to refer to something in a way that everybody can understand it is ask the engineer to play it back and go there.
Mate, yeah, absolutely. So I think, as you said, going back to what you said earlier on, Emilio, that music is its own language, and sometimes maybe words don't actually get the message across. And when you're trying to share an idea, music is the only way to show what needs to be done, in a song. And the only way to explain something is to play the piece to get that message across, and hopefully others then will latch on to that idea that you've created as well. It's man, it's just, I think what is just amazes me, talking to professionals like yourself and many others that we've talked to over the last few months. I think we had a chat about this before we started this interview today. It was the fact that there's many amazing engineers, that some of which have been doing this for 40, 50 years, and they've still got that hunger and that drive for music. And listening to you as well, it's phenomenal that, I know that you've been doing this for a number of years now, that when you talk, you've got this amazing hunger and excitement about creativity and composition that is really, really inspiring. So I think it's great that, that musicians like yourself, composers like yourself, and producers like yourself, that, you just keep going and creating. And many people that I've talked to, we talked to some engineers that are in their 70s and are still at it, and they'll be pretty much, kind of doing it until the day they die. And I think that's the power of music, and the fact that we can just keep on creating, coming up with new ideas. That's exciting. And I just really like the fact that, we can inspire each other and get excited with one another. And I think, you touched on this, I think earlier on, that, maybe off camera, I think we talked about this, but there's so many copycats out there. When they come up with, they always look at what else is out there. But like you said, you need to make sure, what everyone else is creating to then captivate your audience.
But for that, and if that's what you like to do, be my guest. I wouldn't be that excited about creating something that is trying to be something else.
Exactly my point.
Again, some artists or some performers will be comfortable trying to play like somebody else. That's that's also answering to that to the question that was asked before. That's also something to be wary of. To what extent is your plan hindering a performer's ability to express what they have to bring as individuals to the session?
Absolutely.
Some people are more flexible than others, and they will find the emotion in what you are asking them to do. But sometimes that's just not what's going to work best in a given scenario. And you have to to read whether what you're saying is really adding to the performance, or is just stopping it at a certain point because you had that preconceived idea. And more experienced musicians will usually tell you, I'm not hearing that. What are you hearing? Let's hear how that would work. And of course it's useful to be quick in reconsidering your plans and reshaping them around what's real and what's happening.
That's phenomenal. Thank you so much for that, Emilio. So, no, thank you. So before you go today, so anything that you'd like to share with us? Any wise words to keep us going, to keep us writing as composers, and to keep us going as engineers that you've seen over the years that might be able to help support us as a community?
I'm going to say something from the perspective of the older guy that I am today, which is there's no ideal career path that doesn't relate to who you are as a person and what you want in your life. Not everyone is equally ambitious, and ambition itself has artistic sides, has financial sides. You can be ambitious, I suppose, in all aspects of life, but you only have 24 hours per day, and there's only so much you're going to be able to do. Maybe being with friends is important to you. Maybe having time off to meditate is important to you.
Yeah.
Maybe relating to your community is important to you. Having a partner, a life partner, uh, or someone you live with, or children, is something that you want in your life. That's going to condition the time that you have to devote to what you do, and uh, and yes, sometimes having less time to devote to the work or the create or your creative pursuits will have you falling behind in that rat race of doing more, of making more, of working with more people. But if you're connected to what's important to you in your life, that's where you're going to find balance. That there's a an unhealthy cliche in our field, which is the guy who is sleep deprived and has jet lag and stayed up all night working on that thing that had because the deadline was yesterday. And that's all good, and it's good to experience it, to see how you feel about that, to see if that comes naturally to you, to be able to shift into overdrive and make that deadline when that's required of you. But maybe that's not how you want to live your life every day, and that's perfectly fine. So particularly for the younger members of your audience, you may not know this yet about yourself. You may not know who you are and what you want in life, but make sure you don't lose track of that, and don't let the work become who you are, because that's never the case. You are, and as a consequence, your work is what it is and can be what it can be. When you try to make it the driving force between everything you do in life, in the end you have no life. And that's when ideas get stale, when works starts feeling like work again. And if I don't think any of us got into this because we wanted to make a ton of money, even though some do. Uh,
Yeah.
uh, Traveling is something that can come with the job, and super fun and great. But there's other ways to travel. There's other things you can do when you're not traveling for work. Um, so figure out what you really want, and how you want to split your time about the many things that are important to you, and then put all of that into your work. It's going to be truer, it's going to be richer, it's going to be real, and it's going to lead you to a happier life. You don't want
Yeah.
work to take any more space than that, the necessary space to allow you to live as comfortably as you desire and be happy. That's really what it's all about to me.
That's absolutely phenomenal. Such a great answer. Thank you so much, Emilio. It's been absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for your time today as well. I've absolutely had a blast with you, chatting away about how you compose and how you produce music with your artists as well. And super excited to hear about the artists that you've worked with recently, and the new the new songs that are coming out. So again, feel free to tell us what are the names of the artists that you have got coming out this month, and what are the name of the songs?
In order of appearance, today on all streaming platforms, the new single by John Fimbri and Thelma De Freitas called "Ring the Bells." It's a homage to Chick Corea. The backstory to that song is super interesting. You'll find it in the description of the video on YouTube. But essentially, it was sheer emotion that went from zero to song in less than 12 hours via phone messages.
Amazing.
That was just amazing. I can't say I witnessed this. I heard about it the next day. It's like, hey, this happened. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that one. That was produced remotely. I'm here. The composer is in Massachusetts, where he also recorded his piano, and the vocalist and lyricist is in Los Angeles. Up next this Friday, Mythologies by the nice Sant Vlas. Vlas, that's VLASSE. The album is called Mythologies. That's a vocal classical music album. A homage to the composer's Greek origins from her father's side. And next Friday, Trongkom by Tri Nguyen, Vietnamese zither player. The instrument is called Dan Chang. And then after that, I believe the September 1st, there's a new collaboration also by John Fimbri, the composer I was talking about before, with French singer Camille Bertot. And this is a Produce, Mix, Fix, and Conquer exclusive. I have not posted about this yet. It's Camille Bertot, and the musicians are, new guys. Christian McBride, Laurie Goldings, and Billy Martin from Medeski Martin Wood. The jazzers among you will be excited to know that this is coming up.
Oh, amazing. I love a bit of good jazz. That's fantastic. Emilio, sir, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I'm really honored to be a part of this community. First of all, I don't want to come across as someone who's speaking from a place of authority, but only from my experience and from what matters to me. And again, I hope that those who are experienced among us will have their own space to share their experience with us, and those who are starting out will set out to find their own path and their own voice within this community. And those of us who have been at this for a little while are eager to help and to welcome new voices and new sounds into this world.
Exciting times, absolutely. I couldn't have said it better myself, Emilio. Thank you so much, sir. Do feel free to hang out after the interview as well. So I'll end the broadcast in a moment. But thank you so much to everyone that's watched as well today. And as Emilio said, our community is Produce, Mix, Fix, and Conquer. So if you go to facebook.com/groups/Produce, Mix, Fix, and Conquer, or just go onto Facebook and type in Produce, Mix, Fix, and Conquer, you'll find the community on there. So there's over 2,800 engineers, producers, songwriters on there.
2,000 by the time you watch this.
Probably. It's growing pretty quick. Absolutely. But it's been so great. And so many people are equipping one another, like Emilio said, as well. And we're just so excited to see what professionals like Emilio bring to the table, and brand new engineers as well. So Emilio, again, from Argentina, thank you very much for your time today. And so this is the first interview that I'm actually doing here at RSB Mastering here in Manchester in the Northern Quarter, which is the new home base of Produce, Mix, Fix, and Conquer as well. And we'll see you all soon. And I've just seen a message come through from Doug as well in the community. Hey, Doug, and thanks for joining as well today. And but no, thanks again for everyone's time. And Emilio D. Miller, thank you very much for your time today, sir.
Thanks, Rich. Thank you for having me.
Take care. Absolute pleasure. Bye-bye.